Thank you very much, Skip and Nick. I think we have with us today several members of the Leadership Council of the local American Lung Association and staff, and I wonder if I could ask them to stand so you can meet them. They're very illustrative. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'd also like to introduce my colleague at the Red Cross, who's here today, as Chief Operating Officer of Nextdoor Heifer International. Steve Denny is with us. Thank you very much, Steve, for coming. And my two great former colleagues at Red Cross, Darren Irby and Phil Zepeda, now with Feeding America, are with us today. Thank you very much for coming. So, thank you. Well, again, thank you very much for coming today. It's particularly inspiring to speak to you at a school dedicated to fostering public service, because so many of the positive changes in our country were brought about by public service, and especially those of volunteers. And the American Lung Association, as I hope you'll agree, is a prime example of how civic-minded individuals can join together and create real change that improves the lives of millions. The Lung Association has been looking out for America's lungs for more than 100 years. The Lung Association was America's first voluntary health organization, as you heard. It was created to fight tuberculosis. Back at the turn of the last century, TB was the most feared disease in the world. It was indiscriminate, striking down the rich and the poor, and the young and the old. It took particularly heavy toll on children. Now, if I asked for a show of hands and inquired how many of you today worry about tuberculosis, I know that very few here would raise their hands. And yet the World Health Organization reports that TB now infects one new person every second around the world, amazingly enough. But not in the US, happily. And I'm proud to say it's the work of the American Lung Association in the last century that knocked back the threat of tuberculosis so that it is not really on the radar today. On the other hand, if I asked you how many have been touched in some way by lung disease, our statistics say that more than half of you would raise your hand. Maybe you've lost a parent to lung cancer, or have a child with asthma, or a coworker or a friend with emphysema. Our mission at the American Lung Association, as you heard, is to save lives by improving lung health and preventing lung disease. We work every day to protect America's lung health through research, education, and advocacy. We think everyone has a right to a healthy pair of lungs and clean air to breathe. Although we're not really an environmental organization, we do care about air pollution very much, because polluted air damages your lungs and your overall health and can kill. So air pollution is a very, very major health issue. We're also very proud to be big tobacco's worst enemy, because cigarettes are just about the worst things imaginable for your lungs, especially if you're a young person whose lungs are still developing. Smoking is the single greatest cause of preventable death in the United States. The single and cheapest way to quickly improve America's health will be to get every smoker off tobacco. And we'll be talking about these areas this afternoon. Since we're at such a prominent school, let's take a minute for an anatomy lesson and talk about your amazing lungs. They're about the size of a pair of footballs. If you measured their surface area from the inside, you'd have an area almost the size of a tennis court. And the typical person takes about 22,000 breaths every day. And by the age of 70, you'd have racked up 600 million breaths. Our lungs are unique among internal organs because they're constantly exposed to our external environment. They directly interface with our not-so-clean world outside. There are scores of bacteria and viruses, like swine flu, that attack our lungs. That's why things like air pollution and tobacco smoke are important. They both hurt our lungs, and they both can cause premature death. But here's some good news. We can do something about it. Let's take air pollution. Ozone and particle pollution are the most widespread air pollutants and among the most dangerous. If you've seen our recent annual State of the Air report, that Little Rock, like all cities, has both. Ozone, commonly known as smog, is an extremely reactive gas molecule composed of 3 oxygen atoms. When you breathe ozone, it has a burning effect, like bad sunburn on the inside of your lungs. Now, where does ozone come from? Tailpipes provide most of the raw ingredients, but lots of other sources add to this deadly stew. Ground level ozone is made when these ingredients cook in the sunlight and heat. And of course, in Little Rock, like Washington, D.C., you have plenty of both. So we need to cut down on the rest of the ingredients. Ozone can cause wheezing, coughing, chest pain, and asthma attacks. And breathing ozone pollution can even shorten lives. People living with lung diseases will often need medical care and even land in the hospital during high ozone days. Particle pollution refers to a mix of very tiny particles that are in the air we breathe. Now, where do these particles come from? Mostly smokestacks and tailpipes. Burning fossil fuels in factories, power plants, and especially diesel-powered vehicles and equipment generate a large part of fine particles. So does burning wood in fireplaces and wood stoves. There are certain people who are particularly vulnerable to the effects of particle and ozone pollution. Those who already have lung or cardiovascular disease, the elderly, diabetics, and especially children. But research shows that even healthy people, particularly people who work or exercise outdoors, can be hurt by air pollution. A staggering 62% of the population, that is over 186 million Americans, live in areas with unhealthful levels of either ozone or particle pollution. So, how's the air here in Little Rock? Let me put it this way, there's a lot of room for improvement. According to our most recent State of the Air report, Pulaski County received a failing grade of F for both ozone and short-term particle pollution for 2005-2007. You had 39 orange alert days for ozone pollution and 18 orange alert days for particle pollution. That means that for roughly 2 weeks each of those years, the ozone levels were high enough to send children with asthma to the emergency room. For about 6 days each year, the particle levels could trigger heart attacks. This is particularly troubling for the tens of thousands of people in central Arkansas who are especially vulnerable to air pollution, like children and teenagers, the elderly, and those with asthma, diabetes, or cardiovascular disease. Looking at Pulaski County only, those at risk include the nearly 9,000 children with asthma, roughly 44,000 of your neighbors who are over 65, and some 101,000 Pulaski County adults have cardiovascular disease. Luckily, there are many things you can do to reduce the amount of pollution in Arkansas. You can support the efforts to clean up sources like coal-fired power plants and diesel exhaust. MetroPlan, the Arkansas Department of Environmental Quality, and the Arkansas Department of Public Health are working to clean up emissions, but they need our full commitment to make them work. The American Lung Association has been leading the fight for clean air for the last 40 years, and nothing has made more impact than the support of people working locally for healthier air for themselves, their families, and their communities. For example, our volunteers across the nation pushed the Environmental Protection Agency to require new diesel trucks and buses to be 95% cleaner than those built before 2007. I must say that our Arkansas volunteers are also quite concerned about a new coal-fired power plant now being constructed in Hempstead County. The emissions from this plant, while certainly lower than those coming from older plants, can only worsen Arkansas's already poor air quality. This will be a setback in the fight for clean air. There are also many practical things we can do every day to help clean the air. We can drive less. Sign up for ride sharing and take the bus or other mass transit. One tool is an online carpool matching program called arkride.com to help share rides and reduce car exhaust. Don't burn wood or trash. And make sure your local school system requires clean school buses with fewer emissions. We can put equipment on even old school buses to make them much less polluting. And make sure your local schools don't idle their buses. That's a step that can immediately reduce emissions. Use less electricity. Generating electricity is one of the biggest sources of air pollution. And finally, support clean energy. This past January, the Lung Association became very proud partners of the Pickens Plan, endorsing development of cleaner energy like wind and natural gas. We believe that reducing our use of fossil fuels, including foreign oil, is good for the air, good for the country's health, and very good for business. We believe there are great jobs and great business opportunities in clean energy, and Boone Pickens knows a little bit about energy and happens to agree. Now, let's turn our attention to the other huge public health issue affecting American lungs, smoking. Here's how one person described smoking a few years ago. a custom loathsome to the eye, hateful to the nose, harmful to the brain, dangerous to the lungs, and in the black, stinking fume thereof, nearest resembling the horrible Stygian smoke of that pit that is bottomless. Well, if that sounds biblical to you, there's a good reason, because it was written by King James in 1604, the one responsible for the King James Bible. His 400-year-old assessment of tobacco use is still, pardon the pun, dead on. By the way, tobacco is officially classified as a poisonous plant. Even though Big Tobacco doesn't have to reveal everything it puts in cigarettes, we know there are more than 4,000 poisonous and cancer-causing chemicals in them, including benzene, formaldehyde, acetone, and arsenic. Sam Donaldson, the famous ABC reporter with whom I dealt many times in the Navy, and I ran into each other on Capitol Hill a few months ago, and he said, "A cigarette is the only product that, when properly used, it's guaranteed to kill the customer." And he was 100% right. Each year in America, there are 443,000 tobacco-related deaths. 50,000 non-smokers die every year from exposure to smokers' secondhand smoke. 3,600 kids try smoking for the first time every day, and a third of them, 1,100 a day, will become regular smokers. 6 million kids under 18 who are alive today will ultimately die from smoking. Tobacco use is truly a public health crisis, and that's why the American Lung Association cares so much about smoking. If these numbers were instead about things like tainted peanut butter or swine flu, there would be daily headlines and a public outcry. Well, maybe we're just too used to the terrible toll of tobacco. We all know someone who died of lung cancer or COPD caused by smoking. And we all know that tobacco causes heart attacks and strokes. But maybe we didn't know that tobacco is also helping us go broke real fast. Lung disease costs the U.S. economy $154 billion each year. That's $95 billion in direct healthcare expenditures, which include hospitalization, nursing care, and prescription drugs, and $59 billion in indirect costs, such as lost productivity due to absenteeism and early death. Cigarette smoking is also a serious drain on the Arkansas economy. Smoking costs Arkansas close to $2.3 billion every year in avoidable health care costs and lost productivity. There are 443,000 smoking-related deaths in America every year, and smoking causes the majority of cases of lung cancer and COPD. Lung cancer kills more Americans than the top 3 other cancers combined. And smoking is the primary cause of all this avoidable tragedy. And if I can talk for a minute directly to those of you who run businesses, I'm sure there are more than a few in here, let me say that the effect of smoking on your bottom line can be staggering. Businesses pay a very high price for smoking in terms of absenteeism, lost productivity, insurance, healthcare costs, and even building maintenance. Smokers miss more days of work for illness every year, more than 6 days, compared to fewer than 4 for non-smokers. Smokers use up more of your healthcare dollars. On average, smokers were admitted to hospitals significantly more often, stayed in the hospital longer, and even made 6 more visits every year to healthcare facilities than non-smokers. Lifetime healthcare costs are far greater for smokers than non-smokers, despite the fact that non-smokers live fully 10 years longer on average. Reducing smoking will reduce the need for some of the costly forms of health care, such as chemotherapy, radiation, or surgery to treat cancer. These facts may not come as a big surprise, but smoking can affect your bottom line in all kinds of ways. Like fires. Roughly 1 out of every 4 fire deaths in the U.S. is linked to smoking. According to the United States Fire Administration, 25% of people killed in smoking-related fires are not the actual smokers themselves. 34% of these victims were the children of the smokers, and 25% were neighbors or friends of the smokers. And smoking-related fires in restaurants, bars, hotels, garages, office buildings, and other commercial structures cause more than $600 million in direct property damage every year. Reductions in tobacco use would reduce this unnecessary economic cost and save lives in the process. I could go on with this, but I think you get the idea. Smoking is very, very bad for your bottom line, and in these bad economic times, America simply can't afford it. So how can we limit the economic and health consequences of smoking? One way is to pass comprehensive smoke-free laws in every state. These laws will prohibit smoking in workplaces, restaurants, and bars, drastically reducing customers' and employees' exposure to harmful secondhand smoke. Right now, 25 states already have them. That's 16 more than we had in January 2006, when the American Lung Association launched its Smoke-Free Air Challenge. We'd like to see every state go smoke-free. Arkansas made an important step in this direction in 2006 when a law was approved prohibiting smoking in most public places, workplaces, including restaurants. However, workers in small workplaces and small bars deserve the same protection from secondhand smoke, and the Lung Association urges the Arkansas legislature to close these loopholes in the law. We know there are concerns that going smoke-free can hurt some businesses, particularly in the hospitality industry. Yet, the experiences of states that have comprehensive smoke-free laws clearly shows that you can save money on everything from health care to building maintenance and still make money. Recently, Washington State's Department of Revenue reported that business in bars was up 20% in the second year of their comprehensive smoke-free workplace laws. In other words, going smoke-free is good business. But what about smokers themselves? The most effective way to limit the health and economic consequences of smoking is to not start. Because, as anyone who has ever tried to quit will tell you, quitting smoking can be really tough. Big Tobacco knows these facts all too well. That's why they direct most of their advertising dollars towards encouraging young people to take up this addiction. Think about this. The 5 largest cigarette manufacturers spent more than $35 million a day to promote and advertise their products in 2005. So what do they buy with that $35 million a day? They try to buy our kids. 90% of smokers start smoking before the age of 21. So if someone doesn't start smoking when they're young, odds are they won't start smoking at all. Tobacco companies know this very well, and for decades have seen teenagers as a fertile field of replacement smokers for the customers they've already killed. Tobacco marketers know that their products are both deadly and expensive, so to attract new kids, they prey on their teens' impressionable sense of self-esteem with marketing that implies smoking makes you sophisticated, cool, more grown-up, attractive to the opposite sex, or a rebel. That's why they spend millions to market to kids. They create candy-flavored products, feature cigarettes in movies, and pitch them with cool mascots. I'm not sure anybody here thinks that Joe Camel is meant to appeal to adults. But soon, all this may stop. I'm proud to say that after decades of advocacy and education by the American Lung Association and other public health partners, such as the American Cancer Society, the American Heart Association, and especially the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, the President recently signed into law the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act, a law that gives the FDA the power to regulate tobacco products for the first time. The FDA now has the power to stop cigarette marketing to kids. They will also be able to require that those harmful additives I talked about be removed and dictate that nicotine levels be reduced as well. And the FDA will be able to stop them from making false claims like that light cigarettes are somehow less harmful, which we all know they're not. Passage of this bill was an epic struggle, but the fight isn't over. The tobacco companies will fight the FDA at every turn and attempt to weaken the agency's control over their products. The Lung Association stands ready to fight back and help the agency in any way we can. We've been working for years to help keep kids off tobacco. Our program called NOT, short for Not on Tobacco, is America's most widely used program aimed at helping teens end their addiction to nicotine. When it comes to smoking, Arkansas has a lot to be proud of. The Lung Association was encouraged to see Arkansas increase its state cigarette tax by 56 cents to $1.15 per pack this past March. Combined with the 62-cent federal tax increase that took effect in April, this should help thousands of people in Arkansas quit smoking and prevent even more of Arkansas's kids from starting. Increases in taxes on tobacco are a proven way to reduce teen smoking. For every 10% increase in the price of cigarettes, teen smoking goes down 7%. Arkansas should also be proud of its state tobacco prevention and cessation program, which combined with cigarette tax increases and the state's smoke-free law has led to a steep drop in smoking rates, especially among Arkansas youth. In 2007, 20% of students in grades 9 through 12 smoked, compared to 34% in 2001. That's quite a drop. I flew into Dallas recently and sat next to a soldier who was spending his last night in Dallas and then going on to his third deployment in Iraq. And he told me that one of the most important things that ever happened to him was the course the Army offered him to quit smoking, that it had truly changed his life. Meeting that soldier reminded me of something very important, that making a difference in smoking really comes down to one person at a time. It's the same when you're talking about public service or fighting tobacco. It can be hard to commit to creating change when you're talking about unknown thousands, but it's easy when you think of that one special person you lost to tobacco, or that one person close to you who's struggling to quit or battling illness right now. For me, it's memories of my mother, who would send me as a child to the drugstore with a note when I was just a kid, so that the druggist would sell me cigarettes for my mother. Concern for my mother's habit moved me to do my 8th grade science project on the dangers of smoking. And that was way back in 1964, the year that the Surgeon General first came out with his report on the dangers of smoking. 45 years later, I'm relieved that it's illegal for stores to sell cigarettes to little kids, and that situation is getting better. It's exciting to live in a time when so much has been accomplished in the fight against tobacco, like the FDA bill. And with health care reform in motion, there's potential that working together we can finally break tobacco's grip on America's health. And that's the vision of the American Lung Association. But to fulfill that vision, we need your help. We need you to join our fight for air locally. Whether you want healthier air or fewer kids hooked on tobacco, the Lung Association needs your help right here in Arkansas. We have some exciting things planned in Arkansas over the next year. We're going to be hosting our first annual Fighting for Air climb at the Metropolitan Tower on February 13th. This is a great way to support the Lung Association while you race to climb the steps all the way to the top of that beautiful building. Get a team together of friends or family and climb together. We're also really pleased to be offering our award-winning smoking cessation program called Freedom from Smoking here in Little Rock. If you're interested in helping others quit smoking, you can become a Freedom from Smoking facilitator. No matter what you're interested in, we have a way for you to get involved and help the people of Arkansas breathe easier. You can learn a lot more about our work and ways to get involved by visiting our website, breathehealthy.org. So in closing, I want to share with you what we're all about and why you might consider becoming a part of it. We call it our credo. We will breathe easier when the air in every American community is clean and healthy. We'll breathe easier when people are free from the addictive grip of cigarettes and the debilitating effect of lung disease. We'll breathe easier when the air in our public spaces and workplaces is clear of secondhand smoke. And we'll breathe easier when children no longer battle airborne poisons or fear an asthma attack. And until then, we are fighting for air. Thank you very much, and I appreciate your hospitality and allowing me to speak to you. Thank you very much. And I want to introduce someone else who's with us today. Stinson, where are you? So it was Stinson Lyles that drove in from Memphis today. Stinson is a principal with a great marketing agency called Red Deluxe right on Front Street. And if we could go back one slide, it was his folks at Red Deluxe that really helped us frame our platform and our credo. So I just want to recognize Stinson. Thank you very much. So I'm happy to take any questions you may have. Yes, ma'am.
Will you wait 1 second? Thanks.
As an oncologist, I see a large number of lung cancer patients, many of whom are from different areas in Arkansas. They're interested in quitting, but they will not spend money for smoking cessation aids. They will still continue to spend money for the cigarettes. Do you guys provide any kind of coupons or waivers in terms of nicotine patches, the gum, Chantix, anything like that? Any kind of discount?
I'm going to actually call on our staff person here who could address that, if I may.
Yeah, there are some programs for that, but not nearly enough. And I don't know all the particulars in this particular area in Arkansas, but I know we were talking earlier about the healthcare reform legislation, and one of the things that Chuck and his team at the national level are really advocating for would be just that there would be funds available for the preventative health care that can certainly have a huge impact in allowing people to kick that very addictive product that's being peddled to them.
And if I may add to that, we have two sources that people can go to for excellent help that are free. The first is our lung helpline, which is 1-800-LUNG-USA. That's staffed by respiratory therapists, nurse practitioners, nurses, so they can get some up close and personal advice and counsel there. We also have an excellent online freedom from smoking self-paced self-help. I know that Mr. Connor has full intentions of making our really good website that much better. But if they go to www.lungusa.org, there are programs there too. We also have facilitators all over this state. The difficulty, as you've suggested, is there is a cost for clinics. And we are actively pursuing business, corporate, and foundation support so that we can provide some of those programs for free for people that just can't afford it.
I would also like to say that one of the desired outcomes that we're pushing for in healthcare reform legislation is to get insurance companies to do what they don't have to do now, and that is to pay for smoking cessation services for their clients who smoke. So we think that would be a very good step in the area of prevention.
One question.
Why is it that the tobacco industry has said that nicotine is not addictive? I noticed in one of your first sentences on the board here, the tobacco, it was early on, the tobacco industry insists that nicotine is not addictive.
So let me sharpen your question. Why did they get up under oath and say that wasn't? I have no idea. I think you should ask them. I have no idea why anyone would say that nicotine was not addictive. Well, I think they are running an industry that is under threat, and they want to keep their customers. That would be my personal opinion on that. I can't imagine why anyone would get up and take an oath and say something that wasn't true under oath, speaking as a lawyer myself, but that happens now and then. I have no idea, and I would urge you to direct that question to the leaders of Big Tobacco, and they might give you a better answer than I'm doing.
You have a question right here.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I'm a student in the respiratory therapy program at UAMS, and I know that, referring back to what you said, we do refer a lot of patients when we go to clinicals to the Stamp Out Smoking program. That's a free program. Also, we do that constantly to our COPD patients and try to get them signed up for that also.
That's good. Well, thank you very much.
Right here.
Yes, sir.
I was real happy to hear you say that the American Lung Association was in opposition to coal-fired power plants, especially we've been doing some work here on the one that you referenced in southwest Arkansas. I wonder if you could expand on that just a little bit about the impact that a coal-fired power plant could have on a community, because one of the arguments that's been going back and forth here is in areas like southwest Arkansas, people are saying, well, it may be a risk to my health, but we really need the jobs. Could you expand a little bit on the type of risk it could give to the health of a community?
Well, let me just say that you saw the mission of the Lung Association. We are for promoting lung health and preventing lung disease. Now, I understand in major decisions there are many considerations. There's economic considerations, energy considerations. Our focus is, though, on keeping Americans' lungs healthy. There are clear dangers with coal-fired power plants, and so we have, I can't stand here and say that we are opposed to them, but we have concerns about their level of emissions that even the newer and more modern plants will do. So will emit. So that's really, in a nutshell, our position.
Boone Pickens was here recently, and one of the programs Boone talked about was trying to reduce pollution through converting diesel engines to liquefied natural gas.
Could you just speak up a little bit so I can hear you better?
Liquefied natural gas
Right.
as opposed to diesel.
Yes.
And we had a debate here in Little Rock recently considering liquefied natural gas for our buses with no success because it costs more for a LPN engine versus a diesel engine. What can you do on a national level to convince our federal government to do something about this, to promote the use of liquefied natural gas? Because diesel, as you mentioned, is a big polluter.
Well, we were actually happy to sign on to the Pickens plan in a very glamorous location. It was the yard of the New York City garbage truck fleet, where that has all been converted to LNG, I believe. And so some communities are able to operate these efficiently. And for example, Mayor Bloomberg, who is a huge proponent of lung health, realizes that the net benefit to a community is worth the investment it takes in the switchover. Now, they say that cars are probably not going to fit in that category, but large trucks and things like that, and buses can. So I'm not saying there aren't difficulties with them. With that, I think it will take a period of time, but that's why we signed on to the Pickens plan and his vision, and we agree with it because we think the net benefits to America's lung health will be worth the investment.
You have a comment right here.
Yes, one of our board members, Dr. Joseph Bates, is the Associate Director of the Arkansas Department of Health and its Chief Science Officer. He reminds me that the SOS, Stomp Out Smoking program through the Health Department does in fact provide nicotine patches and Wellbutrin free of charge. So one of our initiatives is to partner increasingly with like-minded organizations to get a lot done.
You have a question right there.
Hi, I'm director of the respiratory therapy program at Pulaski Technical College locally here, and I want to first thank you very much for coming and speaking to us. One thing we address, we do a seminar every year in March, and I've worked with the ALA in the past to sort of increase community awareness. Obviously, we feel at the school that smoking is a curse and a plague on our population, and we would like to see it addressed with the same intensity that we have, say, HIV or anything else. And I was just wondering if you could, perhaps some of your local officials could illuminate us on what sort of community outreach y'all are doing other than, we do our seminar, we always invite y'all, or not always, but frequently invite y'all to come and speak. They won't let us do it every year, but we would if we could. But what sort of community outreach locally we're doing, just like this, to educate people and to, I mean, we just have to keep reminding people constantly because we have lived with tobacco for so long, it's easy to fall into that thought, well, it's common.
You know, you're really true. Just 2 weeks ago, I'm going to ask Wayne to address that if I may, but 2 weeks ago I was invited to the Aspen Institute's Health Forum, and I gave them many of the statistics you saw here today, and you could just hear the gasps in the audience. And these are real smart, savvy people who came to the Aspen Institute, and they forget this. They just don't realize this terrible danger that faces the country every day. Wayne, could you address the local question?
Well, our efforts are expansive from the web, from the call center. Once again, we have trained facilitators, particularly in the freedom from smoking, that are statewide. And they've been trained for years and have continued to train for years. We are going to be expanding our staff capability this fall, but we have a singular purpose of keeping our staff footprint as small as possible and working with people like the health department, Dr. Carolyn Dresser, like Cooperative Extension Service that is statewide. And so that's the way we're going about it. And could I provide any additional input? Or? Excellent. She's a worldwide expert.
Right here.
I'm Dewi from Indonesia. I'm a student here. My question is that we have a progressive movement of fighting tobacco back home in my country, Indonesia. But the problem is, until today, is that the tobacco industry is still main income for the country. And then the tobacco industry gives so many jobs for so many people. So if the government want to fight directly to the tobacco industry, they will get a hard situation, because the tobacco industry give so many jobs to the people. My question is that
In Indonesia?
In Indonesia. And then my question is that how American Lung Association movement to give recommendation or information to the government to deal with the situation with when the economic versus health, when the economic versus future health of the nation. Thank you.
Well, I would suggest you start a lung association in Indonesia, and we'll be happy to assist you in whatever materials we can. I think that would be a very good step. But I wouldn't underestimate our enemy. I mean, tobacco, as King James noted, goes way back, and it was part of the Columbian Exchange. It grew up in America, and it was introduced to the world through trade. I mentioned to our volunteers last night, I've got a very wonderful friend who is a prominent Native American Indian gentleman who runs a foundation, and he was joking to me. He says, you know, one of his favorite cartoons is the cartoon of the white man giving liquor to the Indians and the Indians giving tobacco to the white man. This seemed to be a fair trade, but the statue on the U.S. Capitol building has a woman, and she's wearing a crown of tobacco leaves. So that gives you an idea of how far back tobacco goes. As a matter of fact, the designer of the Capitol building is an architect named Benjamin Latrobe, and I was walking by the Senate gift shop 2 months ago, and they're selling ties, men's ties, with the tobacco leaf image that Benjamin Latrobe put on the walls of the Capitol building. So it's a tough fight trying to fight the power and influence and the cultural influence of tobacco. It hasn't been easy, and we've made a lot of progress in the last 50 years. So we'll be glad to help any of those in your country who would like to take that fight on. I have no doubt about the difficulty of doing that.
In the back.
Hi, my name is Kim. I'm a student in the Clinton School also, and I just moved here from Austin, where we had a city ordinance to outlaw smoking at all restaurants and bars, and yet our state is one of the states that's white for having the least friendly smoking laws at the statewide level. And I'm curious what you've seen as far as initiatives going locally versus statewide, what you've seen success in city or in county areas versus in state areas, and the different tactics and how that's worked out throughout your campaign.
Well, I'm going to ask Phil to help me on this, but we were disappointed because the Texas legislature only meets every 2 years. And we had high hopes, we really did, until some foolish nonsense took over the legislature for the last 48 hours they were busy with. We never got that done. The good news is most major cities in Texas are smoke-free. So my question is, well, are we protecting the jackrabbits? Why can't we just make the state smoke-free? Who's out there? So we're going to keep trying on that, and I think we'll have better luck perhaps when the next time the legislature meets. Phil, would you like to add anything? All right. Yes, forgive me. Let's start with the left. The blue states have laws that we like, very strict, comprehensive laws. The yellow are comprehensive laws that are passed, but they're going to roll in and take effect over a period of years. The green are equally strong laws, including restaurants. Red, which is North Carolina, is a strong law not in effect. And the white are our least favorite laws that have weaker restrictions. For example, Pennsylvania. They passed a law, and it took me a while to work with our policy people to understand this, but the Pennsylvania law has a provision that certain facilities can have smoking, like cigars, if they have ventilation. All right. So this means that in reliance on the law, these establishments are going to build expensive ventilation systems. And because of that investment, it's going to be very hard 2 or 3 or 4 years from now to ask the state to toughen up that law, because business owners will say, well, wait a minute, I did what you wanted me to do. I spent $1 million on ventilation. So this is why we'd rather have no law than a bad law. So the white are some laws that I guess are better than nothing, but we're not that wild about them. They could be stronger.
Ready?
Yes, ma'am? Oh, yeah, I'm going to he's calling the questions.
Ready? It's coming. Oh, we'll get you next.
I'd like to make 2 observations so my question will be relevant. When this city had its first non-smoking city ordinance, I haven't been on that one, and the worst thing would happen is when I get home, it was the federal government employees at the VAs that were selling cigarettes cheaper than anybody else would be there waiting to say that I was an enemy, because they were serving them to the veterans in the VA hospitals. I was in Egypt last summer, and I noticed the billboards throughout Africa, the summer before I was in there, that have moved from America to those. The same thing has happened in Japan and China.
Right.
We transport capitalism's profit. And I was wondering, in Geneva, I know that's where all the world headquarters are for health and those kind of things. What is the position?
And that's where one of the tobacco companies moved to set up business.
That's right. That's what I was trying to. Where is it that we think that the wind's going to come back? One of the things that we used to see is the tobacco company used to give as a sexy thing at all of the social outlets, the little sample cigarettes, 6 of them, and they passed them out at sexy places, country clubs,
Right.
Private clubs.
Sure.
Now, the sexy things that the developers in housing do is to talk about a sexy house has an apartment with a fireplace. A fireplace, wood burning fireplaces. To me, that is a creative way of bringing it right back to the things that we're saying. Jobs.
Right.
Why would developers not be dressed to say that you're promoting lung diseases within families?
Right. Good point.
We'll have a question.
Thank you for coming today. Your 2007 American Lung Association report says 24,000 premature deaths every year from coal pollution occur, 38,000 heart attacks from coal pollution, 550,000 asthma attacks from coal pollution. Given these stats, how would you advise people, or would you advise people that it is dangerous to live and raise a family next to a coal-fired power plant?
Well, we would like to see American energy sector clean up and reduce emissions. If it were easy, it would have been done already. It's a hard problem. We understand it's a hard problem. We do our best to take positions that achieve that end. That's why we signed up to the Pickens Plan. Now, we try not to make judgments in other arenas where there are legitimate trade-offs that have to be made. But we are very confident in those statistics. We are very skeptical generally about the idea of clean coal that seems to be on television a lot on Sunday morning talk shows. We are very skeptical about that. But we realize it's a difficult problem, and we work where we can work to ameliorate that situation, particularly with our local people who have to live in those areas.
We have time for one more.
I was just wondering, as far as those restaurants that were given, they're saying they were going to build a fancy ventilator systems or whatever so that they can allow smoking. Have they been given a time frame to do that, or is it just based on, you know, whatever, or to where they do have to actually comply with that?
Well, it depends on the state. The example I cited was Pennsylvania, and I couldn't tell you what the time span is, a year or 2 or 3 or something, but our concern is the good faith investment that businesses who want to accommodate smokers are going to make in these expensive ventilation systems that will inhibit us, our efforts down the road to strengthen those laws. That's the point I'm trying to make.